The children never saw it coming. One minute, they were on a routine school field trip to the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, marveling at rocket replicas and running roughshod over the patience of their exhausted chaperones. The next, they were gone, plucked from reality in an instant, the museum's sterile lighting replaced with the eerie glow of a Dorkani containment cell. The aliens had executed the abduction with clinical efficiency. The beam technology, a marvel of precision, had selected its targets, suspended them in stasis, and lifted them seamlessly aboard the Dorkani extraction vessel. No alarms, no disruptions. Just a clean, silent vanishing act, as though the children had simply ceased to exist. The ship hummed with the quiet assurance of a successful mission. Dorkani officers bustled with a smug self-importance that came from abducting lesser species for the noble cause of scientific advancement. High Scholar Nyrix himself, esteemed biologist and xenocultural analyst, strode through the corridors, his deep blue robes trailing behind him, his four luminous eyes scanning his prized specimens with detached curiosity. Humans. Primitive. Emotionally volatile. Not particularly bright, from what the Galactic records suggested. Certainly, nothing the Dorkani Dominion couldn't mold into something useful. Nyrix stood before the containment chamber, hands clasped behind his back, observing his new test subjects. They were just children, smaller than the adult specimens they had previously analyzed, but perfect for their newest research initiative. Their mission was simple: introduce these younglings to the Dominion, expose them to Dorkani education systems, and recondition their primitive minds before returning them to their homeworld as cultural conduits, spreading the greatness of Dorkani intelligence among their kind. A flawless plan. It had worked on dozens of species before. The containment field flickered as Nyrix activated the adaptation sequence, expecting compliance, curiosity, perhaps some mild whimpering, as their feeble minds adjusted to their new environment. Instead, road trip. Nyrix flinched as a shriek pierced the air, his head jerking back as one of the younglings, a freckled, hyperactive human labeled Timmy, flung himself onto the containment barrier. His face smashed against the transparent field with a kind of unrestrained enthusiasm that suggested he had absolutely no idea what was happening. But he was into it. Beside him, a small blonde female, designation Lisa, was attempting to lick the barrier. Her eyes narrowed in deep scientific consideration. Nyrix turned in disbelief to one of his officers, who merely shrugged in confusion. The other children stirred, blinking into wakefulness. For a brief moment, Nyrix allowed himself to hope they would react with appropriate fear, perhaps some quiet, somber awe at the sheer power of the Dorkani. Instead, the chamber erupted into chaos. A stocky boy in a NASA t-shirt, Kevin, according to their records, elbowed another child in the ribs and grinned. "Dude, we totally got alien abducted." "I knew it," shouted a scrawny kid wearing oversized glasses. The collective reaction of the group could best be described as a mix of unfiltered excitement, belligerence, and utter lack of self-preservation. This is so much better than school. I bet the government already knows about this. You think the president has, like, an emergency alien hotline? I gotta pee. I call dibs on driving the spaceship. A boy wearing a Jurassic Park hoodie turned to Kevin and whispered, "We should totally try to take over the ship." Kevin nodded solemnly. Yeah, we should." Nyrix stared, his mandibles clicking in mounting concern. Why were they not afraid? He gestured sharply to a control officer, signaling for the containment field to emit a mild behavioral deterrent, a gentle, non-lethal pulse designed to encourage compliance. The moment it activated, Timmy screamed, not in pain, but in mock horror, and collapsed theatrically to the floor. "Oh, no," he gasped, clutching his chest. "I've been hit. Tell my MOM I loved her." Lisa immediately followed suit, throwing herself to the ground in exaggerated agony. "The light. I see the light." Kevin knelt beside them, nodding gravely. They were too young. He turned to the other kids. "Who here can do CPR? I saw it on Baywatch once," volunteered another child. "Good enough." Nyrix's mandibles clicked rapidly in alarm. "Cease this. What is the human term? Nonsense at once." Timmy immediately sprang back to life, waving his arms. "It's a miracle." Nyrix's frills flared, his unease growing. What was this madness? No species had ever reacted this way to captivity. It was chaos incarnate, an explosion of misplaced enthusiasm, unsettling creativity, and what could only be described as weaponized nonsense. A smaller Dorkani officer sidled up to Nyrix, speaking in a hushed, nervous tone. "My lord, should we increase sedation?" Nyrix hesitated. That had always been an effective countermeasure in the past. But something about these creatures unnerved him. Before he could respond, Kevin had somehow convinced a nearby security drone to let him access the ship's data console. What does this button do? Don't touch that. Too late. The ship's gravity controls momentarily short-circuited, sending Dorkani officers tumbling into walls while the children howled in laughter. One particularly unfortunate officer landed headfirst into a nutrient dispenser. Nyrix gritted his teeth. Fine. Perhaps direct confrontation was not the solution. They would adapt. He composed himself, lifting his chin. Enough, he announced, activating the holographic translator. You are now under the protection and care of the Dorkani Dominion. We mean you no harm. Kevin folded his arms. Yeah? Then why'd you kidnap us? We are merely seeking to educate you, to improve your primitive minds. Lisa scoffed. Oh yeah? Then why is your spaceship designed like a DMV waiting room? Nyrix blinked. A what? Just saying, Kevin added, glancing at the painfully dull gray walls. Kinda expected more from an advanced species. Where's the cool stuff? You know, laser swords, warp portals, maybe a decent snack bar. You're 12, Nyrix snapped. And yet I have higher standards, Kevin shot back. Nyrix exhaled sharply, pressing a long, clawed hand against his forehead. Perhaps they had made an error in selection. Perhaps human younglings were not the best specimens for their experiment. He turned to the ship's navigator. How far are we from the Dominion? The officer fidgeted. Well, sir, we had to reroute due to the incident in the cafeteria. Nyrix froze. Incident. A new security report flashed on the holoscreen, detailing the most recent catastrophe. The children had overrun the mess hall. Timmy had declared himself emperor. Lisa had discovered a way to override food dispensers, causing an unregulated flood of alien gelatin to pour into the corridors. Several officers were trapped inside, and Kevin somehow had rewired a maintenance bot to play the Macarena on a loop. Nyrix's frills stood on end. He had never known terror before. Then the transmission came in. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing a figure wrapped in darkness, a lone human, eyes burning with focused rage, lips pressed into a tight, controlled line. A female. One of the adult specimens. She leaned forward, her voice calm, controlled, lethal. You took my kid. Nyrix felt a chill crawl up his spine. I'm coming for her. The transmission cut out. Nyrix turned slowly, his throat suddenly very, very dry. My lord, the navigator whispered. Who was that? Nyrix stared at the darkened screen. And for the first time in his life, he knew fear. The stars blurred past in streaks of silver and violet as the stolen vessel ripped through the void, its engines pushed to their absolute limit. Samantha Cooper sat at the helm, one hand steady on the controls, the other tapping impatiently against the console. A trail of destruction stretched behind her, burned-out security drones, hijacked comm relays, and at least one space station with a shattered docking bay. She was closing in. Her fingers drummed a slow, measured rhythm. The stolen ship's interface was clunky, designed for hands with more digits than hers, but she had adapted quickly. She always did. Her military training had taught her to assess and overcome, but motherhood had taught her something more primal. There was no force in the universe more relentless than a parent whose child was in danger. She had first realized something was wrong when Emma hadn't responded to her texts. Her daughter might have been stubborn, might have been prone to ignoring the occasional "Did you finish your homework?" message, but she had never outright disappeared. Then the school had called. Emma had never returned from a field trip. The police were useless, the government even more so. By the time they started running protocols, Samantha had already found the anomalous energy readings in the museum's security footage. A ripple in the air, something unnatural, something alien. Samantha had interrogated a Pentagon official in his own office, lifted classified documents from a NASA black site, and stolen the only ship on Earth fast enough to break the stratosphere and chase down the signal. All within 8 hours. She'd spent the next 42 chasing the pulse of an unfamiliar drive signature, jumping from system to system, leaving a wake of panicked transmissions behind her. A lone human tearing through the void, demanding answers, taking what she needed. And now she was close. The ship's console flickered, alerting her to an incoming transmission. She exhaled through her nose, rolling the tension from her shoulders before she hit the accept button. The screen flared to life, revealing the nervous, twitching features of a three-eyed, red-skinned alien in what looked like a hastily straightened uniform. Unidentified vessel. The alien began, voice uneven. You are entering restricted Dominion airspace. State your purpose, or be. I'm looking for the Dorkani, Samantha interrupted, her tone calm. Too calm. The officer swallowed, clearly thrown off. I'm afraid this is a private. Listen, I'm running on no sleep, pure adrenaline, and a level of maternal rage that transcends interstellar law. I have neither the time nor the patience for this conversation. You're going to tell me where they are, or I'm going to assume you're protecting them. And if that happens, I start breaking things. Fast. The alien made a strangled noise, eyes darting off-screen as if begging someone for help. Samantha tilted her head slightly, letting the silence stretch. You have no idea who you just pissed off, do you? She asked. There was a beat of hesitation. Then the transmission cut. Samantha sighed. Cowards. She flexed her fingers over the controls and punched the thrusters, sending the ship into an aggressive forward roll. If they wouldn't give her a location, she would take one. It took her less than an hour to track down a Dorkani reconnaissance ship in a desolate trading zone. The sleek, over-designed vessel had been monitoring the fringes of their territory, broadcasting a passive surveillance net. Perfect. Samantha didn't hail them. She didn't ask for permission. She simply accelerated, flicked her weapon system online, and fired a warning shot across their bow. The Dorkani ship panicked. It tried to evade, but she was faster, more determined. She slammed her ship into a deliberate collision course, forcing them into a tight spiral. Their shields flared under the pressure. Another direct hit, and they crumbled. Within minutes, she was aboard their bridge, sidearm drawn, gaze cold as frozen steel. The commander, a lanky, over-decorated Dorkani officer, stood rigid, his skin a shade paler than before. His crew cowered behind their stations, unarmed, unprepared for something like her. Samantha didn't lower her weapon. Where's my daughter? The commander opened his mouth, hesitated. His gaze flickered toward his subordinates, as if trying to gauge his options. Wrong move. Samantha closed the distance between them in a heartbeat, grabbed him by the collar of his pristine uniform, and slammed him against the nearest console. The impact rattled the ship's frame. The lights flickered. His crew froze, not daring to intervene. Samantha leaned in, her voice lower now, colder. You took my child. You don't get to hesitate. The commander's breath stuttered. We didn't take any. Samantha pressed harder, forcing his spine into an unnatural bend over the panel. Try again. The commander made a wheezing noise, his hands scrabbling against the console. High Scholar Nyrix, he gasped. T. The Research Initiative, Dominion Flagship, Sector 42 to 91. Samantha let go. He collapsed to the floor, coughing. She turned, already moving. What are you? He rasped behind her. Samantha didn't break stride. A mom on a mission. She stole his ship. The Dominion flagship loomed in the distance, a colossal structure of sleek black metal and ominous blue glow, a monument to the arrogance of the Dorkani. Samantha didn't slow down. The moment she reached range, she cut the stolen ship's engines and let it drift, mimicking an automatic distress signal. The Dorkani, predictably, took the bait. She waited until they brought her aboard, and then she burned her way through their security teams like a force of nature. It wasn't just combat efficiency, though she was trained, though she moved with the precision of a seasoned operative. It wasn't just tactics, though she used the ship's layout against them, exploiting blind spots and choke points. No, it was something worse. It was determination. It was fury. Samantha Cooper fought with the relentless, unforgiving energy of a mother whose child had been taken from her. She didn't waste time. She didn't play games. She broke ribs, shattered joints, dismantled weapons with her bare hands. The Dorkani had encountered soldiers before. They had never encountered this. By the time she reached the command deck, the alarm systems had gone silent. The doors slid open with a hiss, revealing a half-terrified, half-disbelieving High Scholar Nyrix. He was taller than the others, more ornate, his robes marked with golden sigils. His frilled head tilted as he observed her, his luminous eyes filled with something dangerously close to awe. Samantha raised her weapon. "I don't like repeating myself," she said. "So listen closely. You have 10 seconds to tell me where my daughter is before I start turning this ship into scrap metal." Nyrix took a slow step forward, his head tilting in fascination. "You are not like the others," he murmured. "Yeah? You should have figured that out when I started dropping your security teams like bowling pins." Nyrix exhaled through his teeth, watching her carefully. This determination, this resilience, it is unlike any species we have encountered before. Samantha's patience snapped. She surged forward, grabbing him by the front of his robe, dragging him down to eye level. "You don't get to be fascinated by me. You get to be afraid of me." For the first time in his career, High Scholar Nyrix felt true fear. He raised a trembling hand, activated his holopad, and pulled up the security feed. The screen flared to life. A containment chamber. Inside, children. Samantha's stomach clenched. She scanned the group frantically. And then, Emma, her daughter, sitting cross-legged in the corner, arms crossed, scowling. Unharmed. Alive. Samantha released Nyrix so fast he nearly collapsed. She took a breath. Focused. One more step. One more fight. She was here. And she was getting her daughter back. The alarm systems of the Dominion flagship were in complete disarray, blaring uselessly across the corridors as Samantha Cooper advanced with unrelenting purpose. Every security measure, every carefully constructed defense protocol, every meticulously engineered safeguard had failed. The Dorkani had expected resistance. What they had not expected was a single human tearing through their ranks like a force of nature, a storm wrapped in flesh, driven by nothing but sheer, unwavering maternal fury. Nyrix stumbled backward, struggling to process what was happening. His fingers trembled over his control panel, issuing panicked orders to what remained of his forces. The Dorkani had faced planetary uprisings before. They had subdued violent species, broken rebellions, crushed civilizations. But this was worse. A lone, biologically unremarkable human was making their entire military apparatus look like a poorly organized daycare. Samantha had stopped playing defensively. Now she was on the hunt. The security teams she hadn't already incapacitated scrambled to regroup, only to find themselves outmaneuvered, ambushed in their own corridors. She fought without hesitation, without waste, a blur of brutal efficiency. A guard would raise a weapon, and she would disarm him with a twist of his own wrist. Another would attempt to flank her, only to find himself thrown headfirst into a wall. Nyrix watched the security feed in mute horror as she outthought, outmoved, and outfought every single soldier in her path. The comm systems buzzed with frantic reports. "She's breached the upper levels, bypassed the force fields. We can't pin her down. She's moving too fast." She took out the primary energy core, ship-wide systems failing. The ship lurched. Lights flickered. A deep, shuddering groan echoed through the flagship as Samantha systematically dismantled its stability from within. She wasn't just fighting. She was breaking them. Nyrix's mandibles clicked in helpless frustration. He had underestimated her. The other species the Dominion had conquered had broken under far less pressure. But humans? Humans were something else entirely. He turned sharply to his remaining officers. Reroute power to the containment chambers. Seal them off completely. If she reaches the younglings. He didn't finish. Because at that moment, the lights cut out entirely. Emergency lighting bathed the control room in pulsing red. A single sound echoed through the now silent ship. The slow, deliberate click of approaching footsteps. The security feeds flickered. A shadow passed one of the cameras. Then another. Closer. Nyrix's frills flared in alarm. The footsteps stopped. For a breath, there was silence. Then Samantha's voice crackled through the ship-wide comm system. "You took my kid." The words were calm, cold. A simple statement. A promise. And then the chaos truly began. Elsewhere on the ship, the containment chambers erupted into pandemonium as the children, left unattended for far too long, executed their own uprising. Kevin had spent exactly 5 minutes pretending to be compliant before he found the ship's control panel. From there, it had been a series of escalating mistakes on the Dorkani's part. Mistake number 1. They had assumed human children wouldn't be able to interpret alien technology. Kevin had grown up playing with his dad's old 90s computers. Compared to those, the Dominion's interface was basically a glorified Tamagotchi. Mistake number 2. They had underestimated human boredom. Timmy had rewired the food dispensers, causing an unchecked flood of gelatinous alien nutrients to pour through the corridors. Lisa had hacked the security bots, reprogramming them to speak entirely in 80s movie quotes. And now, the containment chamber was a war zone. Kevin adjusted his stolen wrist communicator, scanning through the ship's system logs. "Okay, so, bad news," he announced. "They sealed off all exits." Timmy scoffed. "That's the good news." Kevin frowned. "How is that the good news?" Timmy grinned, cracking his knuckles. "Because that means they're trapped in here with us." And with that, the children revolted. The next 10 minutes were an absolute onslaught of unfiltered, unsupervised elementary school energy. One of the younger kids, Sammy, age 6, discovered the emergency siren controls and set them to play an endless loop of Eye of the Tiger. Lisa hotwired the climate settings, causing the room temperature to fluctuate between Arctic tundra and Sahara Desert every 30 seconds. Timmy and Kevin commandeered a security drone, manually piloting it like a PlayStation controller and crashing it directly into a squad of approaching guards. One of the officers tried to subdue them. He was immediately taken down by a surprise dodgeball attack. By the time the Dorkani had regained any sense of order, the children had not only broken free, they had taken control of the lower decks. The Dominion flagship was officially in a state of emergency. Nyrix's claws dug into his command console. This was not how it was supposed to go. They were the dominant species. They were supposed to be in control. Instead, his entire ship was being systematically dismantled by a single enraged human and a group of hyperactive prepubescents. And then, Samantha Cooper reached the containment chamber. The doors slammed open, revealing a battlefield of wrecked security bots, food dispensers pouring alien sludge, and a group of children wielding makeshift weapons. In the center of chaos, Emma stood unharmed. Her eyes met Samantha's. For a moment, everything else vanished. "Mom." Emma's voice was small, disbelieving. Samantha's chest tightened. "Hey, kiddo." Emma launched herself forward before she had even finished speaking, throwing her arms around her mother's waist. For the first time since this entire nightmare had begun, Samantha let herself breathe. And then, the security override engaged. Nyrix's voice boomed through the speakers, layered with barely restrained panic. "Containment Protocol Gamma 5. Seal all bulkheads. Initiate." He never finished. Because at that moment, the ship trembled violently. An explosion rippled through the upper decks. Samantha turned sharply. "Kevin." Kevin grinned sheepishly, holding up an alien data pad. "A funny story. I may have accidentally hacked their weapon system and launched their own missiles into their own engine core." Samantha stared at him. Kevin cleared his throat. "To be fair, I was trying to open the airlocks." Nyrix's screech of despair echoed across the ship. And then, the Dominion flagship began to fall. Nyrix clawed at his control panel, frantic, desperate, watching as the core readings plummeted. This is impossible, he muttered. We are the superior. The ship lurched violently, cutting him off. He barely had time to brace before the control systems overloaded, sending a final catastrophic explosion through the bridge. Samantha pulled Emma close, shielding her as debris rained down. And then, in one final, glorious crescendo of destruction, the Dorkani Dominion flagship, once a symbol of their might, collapsed into fire and ruin. As the emergency escape pods fired off into the vastness of space, one truth became clear. The Dorkani had made a mistake. They had taken human children, and, in doing so, they had invited humanity's worst nightmare into their skies. The Dorkani flagship was dying. Flames rippled through the corridors as oxygen vents spewed smoke into the collapsing decks. The once pristine warship, a symbol of the Dominion's might, had been reduced to a burning wreck in under an hour. And standing in the heart of its ruin, Samantha Cooper held her daughter close and watched as the empire that had dared to steal from her crumbled. The klaxons blared in a last, desperate warning. The ship's AI sputtered fragmented evacuation orders, barely audible over the groaning metal. Samantha's muscles coiled as she scanned the chaos, calculating her next move. She needed to get Emma and the kids off this wreck before it became their tomb. A commotion at the far end of the chamber drew her attention. Nyrix staggered into view, his once elegant robe singed and torn, his luminous eyes wild with disbelief. He swayed on his feet, coughing against the smoke, but still his gaze found her, and locked onto her with something that flickered between awe and horrified surrender. You cannot be real, he rasped, voice barely audible over the failing ship. Samantha's grip on her stolen alien sidearm tightened. There was still one last loose end to tie up. Nyrix's mandibles clicked as he straightened, drawing himself to his full height despite the wounds mottling his scaled skin. You have undone centuries of our order in a single day. The Dominion cannot fall to one being. Samantha tilted her head, eyes sharp. Looks like I just proved you wrong. A distant explosion rocked the ship again, sending a tremor through the floor. Sparks rained from the ceiling as the emergency lights flickered and died. The fire's glow cast jagged shadows along the bulkheads, painting Nyrix in an eerie half-light. He exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable. Perhaps we should negotiate. Samantha's jaw tightened. Negotiate. Nyrix gestured vaguely at the devastation around them. You are formidable. More than I ever conceived a human could be. It is no wonder your kind remains so unpredictably dangerous. His eyes flickered toward the containment pod behind her, where Kevin and the rest of the kids had already started hot-wiring an escape hatch. Let me live, and I can ensure your kind will never be touched by the Dominion again. Samantha gave a slow, humorless smile. You think I need you for that? Nyrix hesitated. The burning wreckage of his once great vessel reflected in his wide, alien eyes. I don't leave loose ends, she said. Then she shot him. The plasma round hit center mass, knocking Nyrix off his feet. He hit the bulkhead with a grunt, gasping as blue alien blood bloomed against his robes. His eyes fluttered, more from shock than pain, before his body crumpled against the ruined deck. Samantha didn't linger. She turned on her heel, scooped Emma into her arms, and sprinted toward the escape route Kevin had cracked open. The bulkheads were beginning to rupture, heat curling through the seams as the ship's integrity failed. A fresh explosion tore through the hallway behind them, sending out a burst of pressure that nearly lifted them off their feet. Timmy let out a whoop, laughing in the face of near-certain death, while Lisa whooped back and held up a stolen alien energy core like a trophy. Kevin glanced over his shoulder and swore. Okay, less celebrating, more escaping, move. The children tumbled through the loading bay, scrambling into the row of Dorkani escape pods. Samantha followed, shoving Emma in ahead of her before sealing the hatch. The controls were simple, rudimentary even. Samantha yanked the throttle, forcing the engine to life. The viewport flashed white as the flagship detonated behind them. Samantha twisted the pod's course sharply, outrunning the shockwave as it rippled outward, consuming what remained of the Dominion's arrogance. For a moment, everything was silent, save for the ragged sound of her own breath. Then the glow of the explosion faded, revealing the vast stretch of space before them. The kids were cheering. Emma clung to Samantha's arm, tears bright in her eyes, but her smile was unshaken. "You came for me," she whispered. Samantha kissed the top of her head, pulling her close. "Always." The pod's NAV system blinked to life, scanning the nearest safe haven. Kevin leaned over her shoulder, peering at the screen. "Sue, where exactly are we landing?" Samantha flicked through the interface, then smirked. "Somewhere a little more familiar." The alien tavern was loud, chaotic, and smelled faintly of something between engine grease and questionable seafood. The cantina sprawled beneath a neon-lit sky, tucked within the seedy underbelly of an outer rim trading hub, a perfect place to go unnoticed. Samantha leaned against the bar, idly stirring the glowing drink in front of her. The bartender, a grizzled four-armed brute with tusks that curled upward like a walrus, grunted in her direction. "You're the human causing all that noise in Dominion space." She lifted an eyebrow. "You hear a lot." The bartender snorted. "Kid, the entire galaxy just heard about you." Samantha took a slow sip of her drink, suppressing a smirk. "Word travels fast." "Oh, it ain't just words, sweetheart." The bartender waved a thick hand, gesturing to the corner of the bar, where a group of hooded figures huddled over a holographic projection. She caught the flickering image of herself single-handedly dismantling Dorkani security, overlaid with what sounded suspiciously like a dramatic orchestral score. Samantha sighed. "You have got to be kidding me." Kevin, sitting beside her, beamed. "You're totally space famous now." Timmy, still hyped from the adventure, was already telling exaggerated war stories to a fascinated alien who clearly did not believe a word of it. Lisa had found an arcade terminal and was attempting to beat an intergalactic high score. Samantha rolled her shoulders, letting the weight of the past few hours sink in. Her muscles ached, but her daughter was safe, the kids were free, and the Dorkani had learned a very, very expensive lesson. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe. Then something shifted. The air behind her moved. Samantha's reflexes kicked in, and in one swift motion, she drew her weapon and spun. The small, nervous-looking Dorkani standing behind her flinched violently, raising his hands. "Don't shoot." Samantha narrowed her eyes. The alien gulped. I was one of the technicians on the flagship. I didn't support what they did. I only programmed the entertainment systems." Samantha sighed, lowering her weapon. The Dorkani visibly relaxed until a very small, very human voice spoke up from behind her. "Mom, don't be mad." She froze. Slowly, she turned to Emma, who was awkwardly standing behind her chair, rocking on her heels. Her daughter was guilty of something. Samantha knew that expression too well. "Emma." Her voice was slow, controlled, dangerously patient. Emma glanced sideways, then gestured behind her. Samantha followed her gaze. The Dorkani technician swallowed hard. Then, from beneath Emma's jacket, something moved. A tiny, frightened-looking Dorkani hatchling poked its head out. Samantha blinked. Emma gave an innocent smile. "Sue, remember how I said the aliens were kind of fun?" Well, she winced. "I might have brought one home." The entire bar went silent. Kevin's jaw dropped. Lisa turned from the arcade, eyes wide. Timmy fist-pumped in victory. Samantha exhaled slowly, dragging a hand down her face. Not again. And somewhere, across the scattered remnants of Dominion space, the remaining Dorkani leadership received the first reports of the great human incident. They read the files, analyzed the damage, and, unanimously, they agreed on one thing. They would never, ever, under any circumstances, mess with humans again.